So in this tutorial we are going to learn the basics of InDesign to create a Bauhaus inspired layout. So this is the sort of thing that we are heading toward. This is a magazine layout from the Bauhaus design era, and this is a layout that's been inspired by that example that I've just shown. So the first thing to do is to open up InDesign, and we need to go File, New. We need to click onto the document and create a double page spread. So these are the values that we need to place in. We need 2 pages. They're going to be A4. We're going to be starting on page number 2. Make sure they're facing pages. I've selected A4. My orientation is portrait, and I'm using, what am I using? A margin of, let's say, we can say 5 millimeters. So this is really great where we can set our margins, and I'm going to set a bleed as well. So if I put a bleed of 5 millimeters in, what that does is create this red line around my page space. So when I'm placing images, I'm going to place them all the way to the red line so that it prints as far off the edge as possible and none of my artwork gets cut off. So then I'm going to press OK. And I'll just zoom out so we can see. I have my page ready to go. Okay, so our InDesign surface, we would like to work on a typography setting. So make sure you can click that, and that's going to give up lots of little values down here that are going to be helpful for us. Just like Photoshop and Illustrator, I've got my direct selection tool, which is my black one I'm going to use mostly. My white arrow, which I can edit with as well. My type tool is what I need to be seeing. And down here, I've got my foreground and stroke color. And this is an important icon too. If I click and hold on this, I can click a normal view, which is going to give me all of my rulers, or I can click a preview view, which is going to give me a view of how my file is going to print. The next thing we want to do is make sure that we have our rulers visible. So I'm going to go up to View and go to Rulers and make sure I've got my rulers on Show. So that one's hiding them. If I click Show Rulers, that will work there. And what do we need to do next? The next thing we want to do is go over to Layout. And in Layout, we have this function under Create Guides. So this is going to allow us to create a grid method that we can use as a template for our layout design. And often designers are going to use some kind of form of a grid to kind of align their text and their images and their borders and whatnot. So this is going to change depending on the layout that you've been inspired by, but I've got 4 rows, 4 columns and a gutter. So that's the distance between each of the rows. There's a 5 millimeter gutter, and I've kept that 5 mil because it's the same as my border, which I kind of like to keep consistent. So if you want to play around that, you can click preview and see how that looks, and we will start with that grid template. So let's start putting some text into our layout. We're going to use the type tool. So we're going to click on this, and when I click and drag, I create a box. And that's where I can place all of the text from my essay. So I've clicked and dragged, I've released my arrow, and then I'm going to go up to Type, and I'm going to scroll down to Fill Placeholder Text. And this is just going to fill that box with gobbledygook text to see that I can test my layout and see how the type and the titles and the imagery are working before I go and put in my edited essay. So once I have placed that in, I am going to create a larger, what would this be called? A larger letter for the start of my paragraph. So I'm going to click on the type tool and click, hold and drag to create my text box, and I will place a capital letter in there. If I highlight this, I can change the font. I can also change the point size, so I'm going to make this maybe 60 so it's nice and big. I can change the font family as well. which I don't need to do. So always keep, if you were to do this, keep it the same font style as what your text is. And I'm going to place that on top of the start of my paragraph, just there. And now it's overlapping and I can't see the text behind it. So I'm going to go over to this text wrap function, and I'm going to use either one of these, wraparound bounding box or wraparound object and shape. So I'm going to click that, and you can see that the text jumps out behind it. I can also use these sort of values here, and you can see that the text also moves in line with how many millimeter border I'm actually placing on this as well. So this is a really good function to include quotes within your text, and I can do that. Let's have a go at doing that. So we're going to click the type tool again, and I'm going to click and place another text box just here, and I'm going to go to type, fill with placeholder text, and deselect. Then I'm going to click the type tool, and I'm going to create a quote. Anything is fine. So something like the Bauhaus focused on form and function over unnecessary details, in quotations. Okay, so write your quote. Let's make it a little bit bigger so it stands out. I can use the paragraph settings up here to make it centered, or I can use the paragraph settings just here as well. Once I've done that, I'm going to click on my quote and place it in the middle of my text, and I'm not just going to put it anywhere. I'm probably most likely going to align it with a grid line that I've already created. So make these really useful. I'm aligning that with that grid line there. I'm going to go over to text wrap and wrap around object or shape, or actually wrap around bounding box. Either one might make my bounding box a little bit smaller. And for this one, I'm going to include a bit of a border, and you can just maneuver that to however suits your layout. And I'm going to go to preview. Yeah, and I can see that I'm starting to get a really nice flow with just some simple details here. Okay, I'm going to go back onto my normal view. One thing I haven't mentioned is if I'm highlighting the text box and I double click, and that highlights my type tool. So anything now that I edit is in line with this type tool. And I want to make sure that I'm on my paragraph menu here, and I've unticked hyphenate. So that's going to, can you see this word here? Over two lines, it's got this little hyphenation. We want to just, you can highlight it and you can unclick hyphenate, and it will just get rid of that, which is important. Okay, now let's add an image to this section, which I've left clear. So a really good way to add an image is to create the bounding box of where you want to place it before. So I'm going to place my image in this. It works in line with my grid, and I'm going to ensure that the image I'm placing is a rectangle and it's portrait. So I've created my bounding box for my image. I'm going to go to File and click Place. And then I'm going to scroll down to find the image that I want to use and click Open. And it's going to place it within that box. Now, obviously, my image is not large enough. So to change the size of my image, I'm going to click on the white arrow. And then I'm going to double click, and you can see an orange bounding box comes up of my around my image. That's the one. If I hold Control and Shift at the same time, it's going to enlarge it in proportion. So I can make this bigger here, and I'm going to make it come down to my bounding box as well. And then if I click off even though my image was much bigger than the bounding box, it's been cut off and it's sitting inside that box that I created already. And I'm just actually going to scooch that in there too. So what happens is, if I double click, I've got this orange outline, and that's the outline of the image that I've placed. And if I just click once, that's the image of the bounding box that it is within. Okay, so they're a difference, and we've got to make sure that we're editing the one that we think is necessary to edit our design. So I'm going to go on to preview now, and I can see just with those simple steps that I've got a really simple but effective layout with consideration to the grids, consideration to the flow as well, and columns, and making sure everything is aligned. So the side of my image is certainly aligned with the text. This is perfectly centered as well. I've got a nice border all the way around. So there's some few simple steps to include in the tutorial 1 of InDesign.